Mr. Harris, you are recognized now for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Chairwoman Jakowski and members. Really appreciate you inviting me here. I'm going to go off script. I come here because I'm incredibly concerned. I actually have a lifelong experience with deception and how technology influences people's minds. I was a magician as a kid, so I've started off by seeing the world this way. And then I studied at a lab called the Stanford Persuasive Technology Lab, actually with the founders of Instagram. And so I know the culture of the people who build these products and the way that it's designed intentionally for mass deception. I think the thing I most want to respond to here is we've often framed these issues as we've got a few bad apples. We've got these bad deepfakes, we've got to get them off the platform. We've got this bad content, we've got these bad bots. What I want to argue is this is actually, and we've got these dark patterns. What I want to argue is we have dark infrastructure. This is now the infrastructure by which 2.7 billion people, bigger than the size of Christianity, make sense of the world. It's the information environment. And if someone went along, private companies, and built nuclear power plants, and all across the United States, and they started melting down, and they said, well, it's your responsibility to have hazmat suits and have a radiation kit, that's essentially what we're experiencing now. The responsibility is being put on consumers, when in fact, if it's the infrastructure, it should be put on the people building that infrastructure. There's specifically 2 areas of harm I want to focus on, even though when this becomes the infrastructure, it controls all of our lives. So we wake up with these devices, we check our phones 150 times a day. It's the infrastructure for going to bed. Children spend as much time on these devices as they do at the hours of school. So no matter what you're putting in people's brains, kids' brains at school, you've got all the hours they spend in their phones. And let's take the kids issue. So as infrastructure, this is not, the business model of this infrastructure is not aligned with the fabric of society. How much have you paid for your Facebook account recently? Or your YouTube account? 0. How are they worth more than $1 trillion in market value? They monetize our attention. The way they get that attention is by influencing you and using these dark patterns or tricks to do it. So the way they do it with children is they say, how many likes or followers do you have? So they basically get children addicted to getting attention from other people. They use filters, likes, et cetera, beautification filters that enhance your self-image. And after 2 decades in decline, the mental health of teen girls, high depressive symptoms, there's an image here that they'll be able to show, went up 170% after the year 2010 with the rise of Instagram, et cetera. Okay? These are your children, these are your constituents, this is a real issue. And it's because we're hacking the self-image of children. On the information ecology front, the business model, think of it like we're drinking from the Flint water supply of information. This is the business model is polarization because the whole point is I have to figure out and calculate whatever keeps your attention, which means affirmation, not information, by default. It polarizes us by default. There's a recent Upturn study that it actually costs more money to advertise across the aisle than it does to advertise to people with your own same beliefs. In other words, polarization has a home field advantage in terms of the business model. The natural function of these platforms is to reward conspiracy theories, outrage, what we call the race to the bottom of the brainstem. It's the reason why all of you at home have crazier and crazier constituents who believe crazier and crazier things, and you have to respond to them. And I know you don't like that. Russia is manipulating our veterans we have totally open borders while we've been protecting our physical borders. We left the digital border wide open. Imagine a nuclear plant who said, we're not going to actually protect the nuclear plants from Russian cyber attacks. Well, this is sort of like Facebook building the information infrastructure and not protecting it from any bad actors until that pressure is there. And this is leading to a kind of information trust meltdown because no one even has to use deep fakes for essentially people to say, well, that must be a faked video, right? So we're actually at the last turning point, kind of an event horizon, where we either protect the foundations of our information and trust environment, or we let it go away. And we say we care about kids' education, but we allow technology companies to basically tell them that the world revolves around likes, clicks, and shares. We say we want to come together, but we allow technology to profit by dividing us into echo chambers. We say America should lead on the global stage against China with a strong economy, but we allow technology companies to degrade our productivity and mental health while jeopardizing the development of our future workforce, which is our children. And so while I'm finishing up here, I just want to say that instead of trying to design some new federal agency, some master agency, when technology has basically taken all the laws of the physical world, taken all the infrastructure of the physical world and virtualized it into a virtual world with no laws, what happens when you have no laws for an entire virtualized infrastructure? You can't just bring some new agency around and regulate all of the virtual world. Why don't we take the existing infrastructure, existing agencies who already have purview, Department of Education, Health and Human Services, National Institute of Health, and have a digital update that expands their jurisdiction to just ask, well, how do we protect the tech platforms in the same areas of jurisdiction? I know I'm out of time, so thank you very much.
Thank you. Given the prevalence of deceptive content online, are platforms doing enough to stop the dissemination of misinformation? And what can government do to prevent such manipulation of consumers? Should government be seeking to clarify the principle that if it's illegal offline, then it's illegal online?
Yes, a good example of that. So first is, no, the platforms are not doing enough, and it's because their entire business model is misaligned with solving the problem. And I don't vilify the people because of that. It's just their business model is against the issue. We used to have Saturday morning cartoons. We protected children from certain kinds of advertising, time, place, manner restrictions. When YouTube gobbles up that part of the attention economy, we lose all those protections. So why not bring back the protections of Saturday morning? You used to have fair price, equal price election ads on TV, the same price for each politician to reach someone. When Facebook gobbles up election advertising, we just removed all of those same protections. So we're basically moving from a lawful society to an unlawful virtual internet society. And that's what we have to change. Unlike other addictive industries, for example, addiction is part of the deception that's going on here. The tobacco industry doesn't know which users are addicted to smoking. The alcohol industry doesn't know exactly who's addicted to alcohol. But unlike that, each tech company does know exactly how many people are checking more than 100 times a day between certain ages. They know who's using it late at night. And you can imagine using existing agencies, say Department of Health and Human Services, to be able to audit Facebook on a quarterly basis and say, hey, tell us how many users are addicted between these ages. And then what are you doing next quarter to make adjustments to reduce that number? And every day, they're the ones issuing the questions, and the responsibility and the resources have to be deployed by the actor that has the most of them, which in this case would be Facebook. And there's a quarterly loop between each agency asking questions like that, forcing accountability with the companies for the areas of their existing jurisdiction. So I'm just trying to figure out, is that a way that we can scale this to meet the scope of the problem when you realize this is happening to 2.7 billion people? Flat Earth conspiracy theories were recommended hundreds of millions of times. This might sound just funny and, oh, look at those people, but actually this is very serious. I have a researcher friend who studied this. If the flat Earth theory is true, it means not just that all of government is lying to you, but all of science is lying to you. So think about that for a second. That's like a meltdown of all of our rational epistemic understanding of the world.
How have the various election interference strategies evolved from the 2016 and 2018 election cycles?
I'm actually not an expert on exactly what Russia is doing now. What I'll say is I think that we need a mass public awareness campaign to inoculate the public. Think of it as like a cultural vaccine. And there's actually precedent in the United States for this. So back in the 1940s, we had the Committee for National Morale and the Institute for Propaganda Analysis that actually did a domestic awareness campaign about the threat of fascist propaganda. You've probably seen the videos they're black and white from 1947. It was called Don't Be a Sucker. Oh. And they had us looking at a guy spouting fascist propaganda, and someone starting to nod, and then the guy taps him on the shoulder and says, now son, that's fascist propaganda, and here's how to spot it. We actually saw this as a deep threat, a national security threat to our country. We could have another mass public awareness campaign now, and we could have the help of the technology companies to collectively use their distribution to distribute that inoculation campaign so everybody actually knew the threat of the problem. I think every time a campaign is discovered, how do we back notify people, all of whom were affected, and say, you were the target of an influence operation. So right now, every single week we hear reports of Saudi Arabia, Iran, Israel, China, Russia, all doing various different influence operations. Russia was recently going after US veterans. Many veterans would probably say that's a conspiracy theory, right? But Facebook is the company that knows exactly who was affected, and they could actually back notify every time there's an influence operation, letting those communities know that this is what happened and that they were targeted. We have to move from this as a conspiracy theory to this is real. I've studied cult deprogramming for a while, and how do you wake people up from a cult when they don't know they're in? You have to show them essentially the techniques that were used on them to manipulate them. And every single time these operations happen, I think that has to be made visible to people. And just like we said, we have laws and protections. We have a Pentagon to protect our physical borders. We don't have a Pentagon to protect our digital borders. And so we depend on however many people Facebook chooses to hire for those teams. The third-party fact-checking services are massively understaffed, underfunded, and a lot of people are dropping out of the program, and the amount of information flowing through that channel is far beyond their capacity to respond. More or less, fact-checking isn't even really the relevant issue. I think if you look at the clearest evidence of this is Facebook's own employees wrote a letter to Mark Zuckerberg saying, you are undermining our election integrity efforts with your current political ads policy. That says it all to me. And that letter was leaked to the New York Times about a month ago. I think that those people, because they're closest to the problem, they do the research queries, they understand how bad the issue is. Look, we're on the outside. We don't actually know. It's almost like they're Exxon, but they also own the satellites that would show us how much pollution there is. So we don't actually know on the outside. So all we can do is trust people like that on the inside that are saying this is far less than what we would like to do. And they still have not updated their policy.